We are officially recording. So welcome everybody. My name is Jason Falcone. I'm an advisory solution consultant with ServiceNow. I've been with ServiceNow for approximately 5 years. Today we'll be walking through establishing ServiceNow governance inside of, we do talk about a shared services environment, but we also do talk about just governance in general. Co-presenting with me today is Dan Miller. He's a principal success architect. He is from our customer success group. They focus, amongst other things, on governance, and he's going to be kind of my subject matter expert today. Also here we have Haas. I can always call you Haas. So we have Haas Chowdhury here today. He's a senior solution consultant. He's going to be working with us and presenting the questions, obviously doing some housekeeping, letting people in and out. And if he feels the desire, he will add some commentary in his experience as well. So again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat window and we will get to those and answer those best we can. With that, we'll get started. So here's kind of the agenda today. We'll probably be about 35, 45 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. But please, like I said, don't hesitate to chat in a question. And if you have a burning desire, you're welcome to come off mute and talk with us. As you can see, I'm conversationalist. So Dan and I, that's the style we'll use today. We'll be going back and forth in our experiences and working with our customers. I come from the commercial side, and then I flipped over to the federal civilian side about 2.5 years ago, 2 years ago. And so governance is near and dear to my heart, and Dan is a guru at it. So we'll walk through what is ServiceNow governance and why should you invest in it. We'll kind of talk very distinctly about an executive that is engaged versus an executive that is only a sponsor. So we always hear about executive sponsorship. We'll talk about driving governance mindset within an office of the CIO, OCIO, or whatever the name of the group. Part of the organization you may be part of. And then we'll talk about the importance of change enablement. Also known, we call it change enablement, but a lot of people call it organizational change management and why that's important. So let's jump through a couple of slides in the beginning just to set the foundation, and then we'll get directly into the content. So ServiceNow, if you're not familiar with ServiceNow is really well known for delivering the digital workflows that customers and employees can rely on. So really when you talk about something from a requester all the way through to a fulfiller, that is what we specialize on. It's that experience that we drive as the main outcome that the customer is chasing, and that way we can design these workflows to support those experiences. When we look at ServiceNow from specifically the federal side, a lot of people ask, "Hey, are you FedRAMP certified? Do you have the necessary integrations to our systems?" This just kind of depicts the fact that ServiceNow's claim to fame and the reason our customers love us and renew year after year is that we're kind of the platform of platforms, really driving those digital workflows. So behind those great experiences that we just showed you are the workflows that go across the department. So when you look at the ServiceNow platform today, it's one platform, it's one data model, and it's one architecture. And that allows us to drive workflows from whether they're in the IT, and that's where we kind of started our journey with ServiceNow, and then spawning across to the employees and obviously the citizen workflows. And of course, everything on the ServiceNow platform is an application, and customers themselves have the ability to build their own applications. So with that experience level at the top side that we kind of showed you about a minute ago, we build those workflows on top of that platform. And a lot of people think, oh, well, we have a lot of systems of record or we have a lot of existing legacy systems. And that's where ServiceNow really shines, right? We bring those legacy systems not just into one platform to allow you to do workflows across them, but we also allow you to hide that complexity that the employee or customer is usually having to deal with. So when we look at that, today's experience is disjointed, right? Multiple service experiences, having to go multiple places for an employee or a customer. Whether some technologies are email, some are phone calls, some, if you're lucky, you have web portals to submit the request and try to move towards that Amazon-like look and feel. But mainly they're disjointed. They're not talking to each other. And of course, as most organizations start to realize they need to modernize this, they're also modernizing in these silos. And that does not promote the simplicity that most employees are looking for. And as a result of that, and that transformation that organizations or agencies or departments are going through, they're looking for that single service experience, a single service portal or a service aligned chatbot, or the ability to implement technologies like NLU, or natural language understanding, or AI, in order to lighten the workload and move work more efficiently throughout the organization. So as they do this, they really start to focus on a robust service experience. You know, everybody says, "I want that Amazon-like feel. I should be able to, or I should be able to do everything from a browser or a phone or a mobile device or such." And then you look at the customer interaction, right? The ability for customers that can't solve their own problems to get a little bit of help. Where do I really want to put this request? Or is it a request? Or is it a ask for help? Is it, I can't find the right knowledge article? So I call it a customer interaction, but it's that kind of triaged assistance that they're looking for, not full-fledged hand-holding. And then from that, getting them directed directly to the support or services they need. Now, this isn't anything new, right? We've all gone to Amazon. There's a slew of providers of services and products underneath that. And we go through and search what we want, pick the highest rated one, and hit add to cart, and then hit submit. But we have no idea in the background how it goes across all those different departments in order to get the fulfillment of that request. So that's another area that we focus on. And of course, this talk is about governance. And I think by at this time, you could probably see, wow, how would I get that? How would I get that cross-departmental frictionless workflow and hide all that complexity? How do I take the onus of the experience off the employee and put it into the cross-departmental workflows that just work, right? So it's kind of funny because we always say, everybody always asks me, what's ServiceNow do? And I always tell them we make work flow, workflow. So any questions on any of the content that I just covered? Haas, anything in the hopper?
No, all's clear for now. We'll take a moment to remind the attendees that if you have any questions, please do just go ahead and use the chat feature and ask away, and we'll review that when the time comes.
Thanks, Haas. Pretty straightforward stuff, pretty foundational, but I just want to make sure we set that tone. So what is ServiceNow governance, and why should you invest in it? You know, governance is a loaded word. And Dan, please chime in here whenever you feel you want to drive a point home. But, you know, it's decision-making framework, right? And it's meant to accelerate the outcomes. It's not meant to bog down or you know, slow down the process. It's really meant to put the guardrails in place so that you can go as fast as you want. As we look at what is involved, you know, the what, the decisions that need to be made and when, the who, and that is involving who needs to be involved in the decision making, and obviously the how, and then how the decisions are going to be made. I'll pause there for a second. Dan, did you want to add anything to this one?
Yeah, one of the things that a lot of our customers struggle with that pertains to this is there are existing governance controls that every customer has. However, a lot of times they're inefficient. You go to a meeting to talk about the same decision that you've already been to a meeting on, and so on. As you set up this governance from the beginning, things have to be documented well. You know, just like what's on the screen, right? What decisions need to be made? Make sure that those get documented, and who needs to make those decisions. When it comes to the how, one of the biggest things that I hear dealing with a lot of our customers is we have to go to a meeting to make a vote, to vote on something. So my reply to that and guidance is think about your decision-making criteria as you're talking with different parts of your organization. If you've got 5 siloed groups that are trying to make a decision on something, get a common denominator. What are those decision-making criteria points that we're going to use to make decisions? So just keep in mind it's the criteria, right?
So it's almost like a go fast plan. It's kind of like here's the playbook, here's the components of the playbook. Everybody agrees to these rules. So now when we have a meeting, we consult the rules to make the final decision or the final direction. We don't have to vote on everything, and we don't have to keep talking about it. We know where we know the outcome we want to get to. How does it fit into our decision making? That's pretty cool.
Yep.
That's pretty cool. So why invest in it? This is pretty self-explanatory. I preach to my customers, governance, governance, governance. Have a strategic vision that matches an implementation vision. So drive that transformation vision. You got to keep the end in mind. You got to keep that view of where you're going. What the direction is that you're going. Deliver the right work at the right time. Too many times I see, we remember the old world of waterfall projects, right? You get all the requirements in and you start building it. And by the time you get all the requirements, everybody agrees to everything. It's kind of obsolete at the time. I see that as well with the customers that don't have good governance. Is they subscribe to a good vision to where they want to go, but they really don't know how to say, okay, we're going to crawl, walk, and then run and deliver the right stuff and put the right decision making in place to remove the roadblocks to get the first step done. They try to solve all of it up front, and it typically takes a very long time. And then lastly, maintain the integrity of your ServiceNow implementation. I can't say this enough. If you don't have a governing body or governing work around how things should happen inside the ServiceNow environment, you kind of wake up one day and say, okay, we need to migrate to a new instance, or we have to do something. And not everybody has followed all the best practices they should within ServiceNow, or at least not documented where a full-fledged customization may have been needed. And therefore, the ability to be agile and fast when trying to take on new features or upgrade or whatever it is, it's just lost. It gets down to a crawl because you now have to go back and look at all this technical debt. If you are familiar with other ServiceNow implementations, one of the first questions that I always ask is, what version are you on, or how often do you upgrade? And I get a mix. I have one department that hasn't touched their instance in 3 years. I have another department that literally the day it goes GA and it's been FedRAMP authorized, they upgrade. So it's there's a mix out there. Dan, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, about the only thing that I would add is that last bullet. So if you zero in on maintaining the integrity of your implementation, zero in on that defining and applying. So a lot of times customers can define those best practices, whether it's technical, whether it's from a strategic perspective or your portfolio. But one of the main points not to miss is applying and enforcing those best practices. So ensure that you have roles clearly defined, and we have a certain person that helps you apply those best practices across your enterprise.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about this as we get into kind of the examples of a shared services. Why? Because when you talk about shared services, you could have multiple implementation partners. You have the platform team upgrading the platform and maintaining the platform. There's a lot of people in the orchestra that you have to have a good concerto for. So You know, Dan, I'm gonna let you take this one because you know this content
Sure.
better than I do.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, you know, I could read every one of these things, but I do want to zero you in on the right side of the screen where we talk about those governance and standards. And, you know, I'm always the guy that talks about people, process, technology. I mean, we've all heard that buzzword out there, but if you start at the bottom, you want to make sure that you're doing the right things, right? So as you're going through governance, you need to have that good decision-making criteria that I mentioned earlier. Doing it the right way. There are tons of standards out there, but ServiceNow, one good thing about that, we've got plenty of documentation, especially at our customer success site, that talks about the correct standards to put in place around your architecture. And then getting them done well. You have to have the right procedures, processes in place. So you don't want to come in and go against our standard workflows and processes because we put a lot of time into that. So that talks to customization, right? Going in, I see customers that come up that, you know, Jason mentioned, and you have difficulty with upgrades. So you don't want to customize. We've put a lot of work into making sure these are proven practice workflows. So that's one area. And then you have to measure, right? Are we realizing the benefits that we originally, down to the bottom picture, that we decided this was the right thing? So we've got to measure what success is and make sure we get that business value realization.
That's a great point. That's a great point. You know, I like the hold the platform owners and the admins accountable for meeting the enterprise standards and supports their ability to accomplish. Yeah, I mean, it's key to have a good, solid team, and not just have a good, solid team, but enable that team to be successful. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in the presentation. Hey, Haas, I'm going to check in with you. Any questions in the queue?
Yeah, well, so does ServiceNow have any governance resources or best practices or any guides available to help with these governance outlook?
Yeah, so Dan mentioned that, and at the end of this slide deck, we'll actually link out to we'll be able to send this out to the attendees. But there's actually a governance workbook that we provide that customers can go through and start their journey. And then, of course, our customer success site, it has a slew of, I mean, just tons of governance information that's out there. So we'll make sure everybody has that. That's a great question. Thanks, Haas.
Yeah, awesome.
So we're going to jump in. Executive engagement versus executive sponsorship. Dan and I are in heated agreement. I will say this is pretty direct. It is great to have an executive sponsor. Any executive that stands behind your project is great. But in order to do transformational stuff, in order to do modernization, you need an engaged sponsor. You need an engaged executive, someone that is a change agent. And I would say, out of all the things we're going to cover today, and we're only covering a small subset of governance in the time that we're allotted, an engaged executive that is not afraid to move forward, that is a true change agent inside the organization, is probably the number one reason we see customers kind of trip up in getting their governance laid out. Because if the executive understands it and the executive has that strategic vision and is able to drive that, the better off you're going to be. So, executive alignment is key. And I love this example of the ship and the captain there in the back and his team looking back at him, as well as the other boats behind them. And they're looking for both. They know what they're supposed to do. They're accountable for what they do. They're professionals. And what's great about it is that captain is engaged. He's not there just sitting there for the ride. He's making sure that the strategy and the vision and the direction is always being corrected and that his team, when he says, hey, we need to go left, right, whatever it is, they have the responsibility and what they know in a concerted team to get it done. So Dan, you want to jump in here, because I could literally talk for hours about engaged executives in what we're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And let me say this. So I started putting the top part of this slide together. Jason and I kind of built this together, and the reason I did is because I'm usually the guy that gets involved on the customer success side to come in and have those conversations with the C-suites and the vice presidents and so on. And one of the takeaways that I always explain to them is, we can come in here and understand what you want to do from a strategic vision perspective. That's very important, right? However, when we talk about executive sponsorship, you can't say, yep, I sponsor, and we don't hear from you again. That's where executive engagement, so communicating, constantly talking about the transformation, being engaged and up to date on what's happening with transformations and so on. But as it pertains to governance, you see that last bullet. Who will be empowered to lead the transformation? So I see one of two things happen, which are not good. One, you have 3 or 4 different people trying to set up governance for the organization, which right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, or someone at the lower level is assigned to set up governance because everyone thinks it's a technical thing only. So you'll notice, and I phrased this exactly how I meant to, who will be empowered to lead the transformation from a governance perspective? That person has to have the backing of the executive and be constantly in communication so that we can do that.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I cannot stress enough. It doesn't have to be the highest level executive. It just needs to be an executive or a person. Maybe it's not an executive. Maybe somebody who is empowered to lead it, who's not only not afraid to break some eggs, but is got the backing of the executive sponsor to say, go break some eggs, go make this better. This is something we need to get right with this digital transformation. So that's the desire. Do we typically fall somewhere in the realm of that? It's difficult, because exactly what Dan said. An executive says, or the CIO says, oh yes, I'm all for this. This is great. So-and-so is going to lead it. And that person that they deem to lead it is either not prepared, not up to speed, and may or may not have the full backing based upon what they're being asked to do, because quite frankly, they might not know what they've been asked to do. And that happens way too frequently. So, like I said, I could talk for hours about this, but we'll keep moving through the slide. If there's any questions on this, this is probably the number one thing that you gotta really make sure that you have buy-in to, because it's the foundation of building the governance inside of the organization. So, Dan, your favorite slides?
So I can tell everyone I built this slide out, and there are many, many times that I use this slide and this slide only when I meet with C-suites and executives across different organizations. And so, and I'll give you the talk track that I use on this is, we've all heard of people, process, technology. That I mentioned it earlier. That's a buzzword that we've all heard, and so on. So the technology portion, let's talk about that. ServiceNow, Salesforce, Remedy, HP Service Manager, all these different tools out there. That technology works. Otherwise, we all wouldn't be in business. So what is it that customers deal with that they have those different technologies and they're still struggling. The biggest struggle is defining that vision, putting it on paper at the executive level. And then you'll notice that to the right of that is, what are the mission outcomes down to the next level that support that strategy? And is it on paper, right? So, for instance, one of those mission outcomes may be to reduce service outages or provide a one-stop shop for all employees and customers, so on and so on. And then how does that relate back to your mission processes or workflow? And getting that all defined. And then if you remember that ServiceNow was to the right, we can then map that to ServiceNow easily if we understand the vision, the outcome, and the desired outcomes. Now, you'll notice the two long boxes: governance around the strategy, the portfolio, and the technical side, the platform, and organizational change management or change enablement. That's what holds that entire strategy and transformation up. Without those two areas, that transformation just falls apart. And all of this, the giant gray arrow, feeds straight into your multi-phased implementation roadmap, supported by partners.
You
So
got
I'm going
it.
to pause there and ask for questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is usually a time where we get questions.
Sure. Yeah, I got one here. How does governance of the ServiceNow platform interact with existing governance and enterprise approval boards?
That's a great question. So keep in mind that governance of the platform is not just technical. So we need to understand most customers have governance from the aspect of an approval board at the enterprise architecture level, so on and so on. And what we have to do is make sure that we focus in on that strategic vision, the outcomes, and make sure everyone's driving. That's the strategy part of governance, right? And the communication of that on organizational change management. And all of that syncs together so you can make the determination between big G of governance, making approvals from a financial perspective, or little g, which is putting the standards around operating the platform. And there's a whole entry process around that, which is outlined out on our site. So
Awesome. Also, any other questions that came in?
No, the question well is pretty dry up to now.
Yep, that's fine. So we give an example of the first part of this. So let me jump back for 1 second. The strategic vision, the strategic drivers, right? That executive leadership is what we're giving an example here. This is an actual government agency. This is their what they worked with Dan on. So Dan, I'm gonna let you go through this, but I want to make sure people understand how we take that kind of talk track and it's a talk track until it's in writing, until it's confirmed, until it's in writing and everybody can see and have that playbook in front of them. And this is an example of that playbook for at least the strategic vision through the mission outcomes. So I'll stop there and Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, this is as Jason mentioned. This comes right from one of the customers that I helped put this together. So, so to give you kind of the setup of this was an agency that had 8 deputy CIOs with 7-figure budgets apiece, at least, and some of them were 8 figures. And we walked in, and they were all doing different things. So the CIO came in and said, I want an interconnected and informed department. He was just going off, and I captured that, put it on paper, and then we started developing what are the things that support that. So we put the drivers together, and then we said, what are those outcomes that are going to help and complement the strategic drivers, right? And then, of course, the CIO said, we've got to become, our differences have to make a difference. And he started talking about some things like that, right? And we captured those as guiding principles. So now, as we went through that transformation, this slide popped up all the time on TVs around the agency, and it was used before meetings, and the CIO wanted to know, are we meeting those? We had measures aligned to all of the outcomes, like I mentioned earlier. So this was actually putting it on paper and getting the buy-in from the entire enterprise.
Thanks, Dan.
So, any questions?
Yeah. Any questions? Go ahead.
So Dan, yeah, what are these numbers down the middle?
Oh, so this is a ranking of the mission outcomes. So from deciding on where do we go first, remember I mentioned that we can map the platform over to the mission outcomes very easily. The question becomes, how does that roadmap get developed? Well, you have to prioritize your outcomes.
Great answer. Hassan, any other questions on this one?
Excuse me. Yeah, just one more. So what type of an executive would be a good fit to be a sponsor?
So I think there's two answers here. I'll go first, and then Dan, you chime in. One is any executive that is a change agent. Any executive that's willing to listen, that has an open mind, because it's two things here, right? We're talking about governance, but you're putting forward a governance model that typically has not existed. When you talk about these siloed organizations, you have these executives that are CIOs that are pounding their hands on the desk saying, look, we can't act like this anymore. We need to get to that cross-departmental frictionless workflow to make that experience for our citizens or for our employees, to retain the right employees, to grow to grow as an organization, whatever the strategic vision is. Any executive can do that, because they wouldn't be an executive if they didn't have the leadership skills. But you need that one executive that's willing to be that change agent, and it's a scary thing. So it does take a unique person, but I think any leader can do it. And like Dan said, once they have this visibility into what they're focused on, I tend to see a lot of leaders that typically wouldn't stand up and raise their hand because it's clear. It's clear in the strategic vision that they're going to go down. Now it's down to execution. And every executive that I've worked with that has gotten to the execution stage with ServiceNow, it's been great for them because they've learned and they've achieved that modernization. So I'll stop there. Dan, what's your take on the executives?
I think one of the things that executive sponsor and that executive engagement, that person that's going to drive this that's on the screen, needs to have a good voice into the entire enterprise. So if you think about a mission outcome, maybe it points towards HR. Well, that means your executive can't just be a lower level person in IT, because they're not going to have that interaction with the HR vice president, right? So that plugin needs to make sure it's there. If the executive sponsor is too low that can't get an audience with the HR VP, then that backing up at the higher level needs to be there, back to that empowered word, right? So that's the only thing I'll add there.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Haas, I'll give you one more shot. Yeah, anything else on this one?
Nope, that's it.
Yep. Cannot stress enough how important it is to have this done. And this is not something like you just sit down and you write once and it's done. It really helps align everybody to, and from here, governance can be applied. So let's keep moving along. We're actually, oh my gosh, we're 139 already. So let's talk about driving the governance mindset. So you got your engagement, your executive sponsor who's engaged. So now you need to drive this mindset. And this is where we'll talk a little bit about shared services. The reason that governance in a shared services environment is a little bit different in a singular environment is in a singular environment, you typically have departmental silos, but they're all aligned to one goal. When you, to Dan's point, when you're talking about kind of the mega departments or the mega groups that have huge budgets, they tend to think I do things better than you do, so we should do it my way. What we always tell people is, prepare to set up the ServiceNow governance. Prepare by making sure it's a win-win for everybody and you're accounting for as much as possible. When you move into step 2, defining it. This, and I'm sure Dan will chime in here, defining it, getting it down on paper. We're not saying it can't be amended or it can't be changed over time, but get the written word down or get the written structure down. Just don't say, oh yeah, that'll be handled. And then third, always be willing to improve. Going into a consolidated shared service model or consolidating, if you're just a single agency or a single department, consolidating everybody to one single platform or one single environment you're going to find out so much about what each department needs, and you're going to continuously improve and bubble up what are some very constant things inside the organization. So Dan, do you want to add anything on these? These are pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I think you did a good job explaining that.
So like I said, we have that executive sponsor, and that executive sponsor is engaged. Hopefully it's an engaged executive sponsor. And he's got to be empowered. And Dan, you're going to jump in here and take over, but he has to be empowered to communicate that strategic vision to that platform owner. So now now that you're starting to establish the governance, you're defining who that platform owner is going to be. Who is going to be responsible for, and I'll build these out, Dan, I'll let you talk through them.
Yeah, so, to Jason's point, that platform owner, so I mentioned earlier the roles, and Jason's going to mention that on some subsequent slides too, but defining the role, that platform owner is going to drive the strategic vision for the sponsor, right? That platform owner is going to help define all the scope, the direction, and the goals for the executive sponsor's vision. Planning how they set up that governance to make sure the track gets oiled well and it stays on the track, right? And then help to build out the team, those different roles, so that we can actually put in that governance model.
Okay. Very important. Executive sponsor, platform owner, tied at the hip.
Yep.
Right? Not saying that when I say tied at the hip, that is the lieutenant to the executive sponsor and what's going on, but that doesn't mean the executive sponsor is not engaged. They are participating and helping bring together, once they've identified all those people, bring them together and be that unifier. So this is a game. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say a good analogy there for the Game of Thrones watchers. Platform owner is the hand of the king. They speak for the king. Right?
There you go. So I'm going to give you this example. This is an example of another government agency. This is a shared services environment, right? This is how they wanted to and how we help them define how their organization works, right? They have multiple different executives and ACIOs and deputy ACIOs. So they really wanted to understand the differences between, how they would set up a center of excellence inside of a shared service environment. So if you're, a lot of people throw around the word center of excellence. In this regard, center of excellence is a part of the shared services environment that will manage and maintain the governance and kind of be the gatekeeper to putting things on ServiceNow or interacting with ServiceNow. So when we look at this, we help them break it into 3 areas. One, the business platform leadership. We've been talking about that. The executive engagement, the platform owner. It could also include portfolio owners, depending on which way the organization's going. So in this aspect, a portfolio owner is the CHRO. It could be the CISO. It could be if you have servers and hosting or a cloud hosting division, it could be them. So these are these portfolio owners. The platform strategist is that person that understands where, it's almost like an enterprise architect that could be inside the organization. The chief architect, these are all different roles at a business platform strategy that will continuously communicate that strategy and vision of where they're going. How does the ServiceNow platform help them meet their business objectives? The COE platform leadership team is, hey, how do we run that? And you notice that there's no, if you're familiar with ServiceNow, there's no solutions around this middle. It's just the platform itself. There's no applications plugged into this. How are we going to run the platform? How are we going to take a portfolio owner and make platform portfolio managers to make sure that the implementation of those solutions adheres to those governance documents that we talked about earlier. And then we have the traditional O&M, or the operations and management of the platform. How are we going to manage the ATO, manage the platform upgrades, so on and so forth. One of the key parts of this platform role, and we'll talk about it in a second, is this demand management, right? And this is very, very key to the governance model. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then lastly, and they needed an implementation excellence, because one of the things that we typically find inside the government agency is there's a vehicle in which task orders can be put forward, but sometimes they bring in additional implementation partners. And in this example, they wanted to not just have strategic partners helping them with the strategic vision, but they wanted to be able to plug in multiple implementation partners. Maybe one implementation partner is better than another in a certain area. So they wanted the ability to have an implementation excellence team that they could now look at these implementation partners and say, here's your run book of how you can interact with this governance model. Next, defining the governance process, right? So we talked about demand management and collecting the demand. A lot of questions start popping up. What should we do? Where should we start? Do we have budget? And all of these start to flow into the different parts of your governance model. So it's technical governance, portfolio governance, or the strategy. So we have to make sure the right work gets to the right area and it is addressed in that manner. And as this work comes in and flows to the right parts of the organization, we can then start to align the governance that we've agreed on across the different groups of strategy, portfolio, and technology. And the outputs of that are exactly what they look like, right? Defining ServiceNow strategy and vision, doing the budget and resource allocation, prioritizing that backlog, scoped and sequenced implementation because it's clear what's priority and what needs to be done. And then, as we've been saying over and over again, the technology policy and standards that need to be in place in order to manage this effectively, prepare it with bring it to fruition with best practices to survive ATOs, to survive upgrade paths on a regular basis, to be that agile platform for the business needs. I mean, COVID is a prime example of how some people had platforms where they could quickly click in an application and manage PPE, manage their different buildings and what needed to be done and cleaning schedules. Other folks didn't have an agile platform. What did they do? They ended up with spreadsheets and managing things manually or in an old way. And what the worst part about that is all the data that can be captured by doing it in an agile or a very flexible agile platform methodology, just adding in the application to the platform. Those folks are able to garner the analytics from it, garner how it start to cut that data left and right and start integrating with other data. Whereas the folks that weren't necessarily prepared for it have to take those spreadsheets and assimilate what they can as far as meaningful data and then put it into a system in which to get something out. So I'll give you an example of another department or agency in this aspect. That COE that I described above, it was established. All that governance was established. Now they want any of their offices, agencies, or any of their departments to come to that COE, and they are going to have that standard process with all of those technical, strategic, and all of the capabilities to manage that demand and prioritize and adhere to those platform principles, all through a normal process. So lastly, the continuous improvement. This is pretty self-explanatory. Anything, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So obviously define the metrics, to find out what's telling you it's working. It could be in the aspect of the COE that I was just talking about. How fast are they able to bring consolidate solutions and bring new solutions up, install them, get them up and running, and get them moving in the right direction. And then another one would be, how fast can we upgrade? Can we upgrade 1 week after it releases, 2 weeks, or does it take us a year to upgrade? That's a good example. Remove the bottlenecks, pretty straightforward. This goes everything from technical bottlenecks all the way up to needing that executive engagement to remove the bottlenecks at the organizational level. And then obviously, last but not least, triage decisions. It is pretty self-explanatory, but all the activities on the front line, just ensure that you're triaging what needs to be done. It's not an agenda-driven implementation. It is a prioritization of outcomes, in my opinion. Dan, did you want to add anything before we move on to the next section? I know we're down to last 8.
I think that's good, and you can go ahead and move on, Jason. Yeah, I think the OCM change enablement, right? Organizational change management. It always gets put to the end of every presentation. It gets put to the back end of every customer's mind because it's viewed as something that's just not as important as standing up a platform or things of that such, right? Pushing update sets or doing upgrades, it just always gets pushed away. So when you think about, and I've worked with many customers to help put a good change enablement plan in place, and that's talking about communicating effectively and training efficiently. So it says it right here on the screen, right? Organizations, we are all in the midst of our day-to-day jobs, and we always think about things logically, but a change to how people do things, that's an emotional change. If all of a sudden you have to start driving on the other side of the road, you've got to manage that change, right? That's an emotional change, not only physical and mechanical, but it's emotional. So you have to manage it, right? And so many customers want to do the lift and shift from whatever they're doing today over into ServiceNow. And that's not only from a technology perspective, but that's a workflow perspective, that's a communication perspective, and so on. So you ask the question, how do we do that? So that takes it to the next slide, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
So what you've got to do is do a very clear assessment and plan for the change you're going through for a transformation, right? You've got to do stakeholder analysis and understand who are your supporters, who are your resistors, who's active, who's not. Do that business impact analysis and your training plans and communication strategy, so on. So if you bring it up to the high level, you have to assess and plan. You have to communicate that change well. You've got to enable your enterprise, make sure they're trained in order to manage this or this transformation. And then you want to measure and make sure that you're doing things well. Are we actually adopting this change?
So Dan, I want to point out two things there, right? Champion enablement, right? For those of you who don't know, we do on our website have a champion enablement website. It's absolutely chock full of OCM or change enablement collateral, so that you don't have to pull your hair. Yeah, pull your hair out trying to make PowerPoints or trying to say, hey, I'm going to create a organizational change management process from scratch. We have all the frameworks. This is best practices proven. It's all available to you. The other thing that I'll point out is the adoption measurement approach. There's so many times that I talk to ACI and say, so tell us how your experience with ServiceNow. How are you liking it? Are you getting what you wanted out of it? And they answer, oh, yes, I am. Well, good. Well, give me some metrics. What improvements have you had? Oh, no, we're doing things faster. And it's like, that's wonderful. I'm always happy that a CIO or an ACIO says to me, we're really loving ServiceNow. But in actuality, I really like them to say, we have improved our customer satisfaction by X% because we're measuring it this way. Or we've cut down our change windows to our change advisory meetings to minutes versus hours because we have all the necessary information in place. That's reduced so much cost. I'd love for them to speak in those words. And it's very important to measure, have those measurement, adoption measurement approaches known as you go in. This is what we're going to measure. And at the end of it, this is what we should be able to say. And if we don't, we're going to adjust and get it there. So yeah. I know we're pulling up on the last 3 minutes of it, and I'd love to have some questions if we can. But I'm gonna go ahead.
I'll go through this real quick. And you can build this out if you want, Jason. So champions of change. So we've talked about the executive sponsor, the platform owner, and then you have service owners. So a champion is a decision maker or an influencer with authority and credibility. They're a customer who evangelizes and supports the expansion of the platform to promote utilization across the enterprise. So to have an effective change, you usually have 3 champion roles that are critical, and these 3. The executive sponsor is usually a director, CIO's direct report. This got back to one of the previous questions. The platform owner, this is the service owner for the ServiceNow platform. And then service owners. This is someone whose process was successfully implemented on the platform and has had, to Jason's point, measurable success. And they become the internal reference. These champions are aware of, they help develop, and they totally support the documented business outcomes that we originally put together, right? So there are interconnections and dependencies between these 3 folks. The executive sponsor sets the vision. Platform owner is responsible to execute that vision. And then those happy service owners of the platform are now the internal success story.
Very nice. Very nice. So let's go ahead and wrap it up. Haas, were there any burning questions that came in while we were going through this?
Yeah, well, there's one that, about training. Is that part of change enablement?
Yes. Yes, most definitely.
Yeah,
So think about change enablement as communications and training. We kind of lump those together. That's usually your change enablement person or OCM person. And then we've got plenty of resources, as Jason mentioned, out on our
yes.
site.
And I'll leave you with this one. Yeah, I went through our knowledge event. We had Chevron present, and it's a really great presentation. If you go out, I forget the gentleman's name, but just search Chevron out on our knowledge content on our website. But one of the things that he put through there, it was as part of the organizational change, was we're not going to train our end users how to use this. We're not going to train them. And the reason that you bought it, if you know, I laughed at my wife when she started with Amazon. She ordered a 50-pound bag of rice, and I said, "Well, you got to look at those labels of how big each thing is because it's not like going to the grocery store." But what his point was is their design principles wanted it to be so intuitive that they didn't need to do end user training. They wanted it to be so intuitive that when they came in and they said, here's what you want to do, maybe it was guided tours, maybe it was a pop-up help, whatever it may be, but they wanted it so intuitive that they didn't have to spend a lot of time and effort training the end users on how to use the new solution. So let's go ahead and wrap up here. A couple of things. We're going to have some key takeaways here. Governance is about accelerating decisions and outcomes. Plain and simple. Strategy should drive the governance. That's that executive engagement, the executive sponsor with the vision and the strategy driving to that platform owner. Avoid governance for the sake of governance at all costs. Dan, I'm going to let you close that one out because I tend to have a different view than you.
Yeah, so the way I look at this is avoiding governance for the sake of governance. So I'll see customers just put people in roles and not put any guardrails around the roles, around the standards, back to the enforcing, right, and applying those governance standards, making sure that you put guardrails in place and you actually are using what you put in place. You don't just put things in place and forget about them. That's how I look at this.
Awesome. So what we'll leave you with, and we can get this out, you know, what should you do next? This is the success workbook, the collateral, the success insights that are out on our customer success center. If you go to ServiceNow.com and search customer success, you will get to the customer success center. Discuss governance with your platform owner and executive sponsor. If you simply are doing an implementation and you do not have governance in this implementation, please start having a discussion about it. It will, in the long run, make you remember what this said. This, I can't stress this enough. Governance is about accelerating decisions and outcomes. So without having that discussion in the long run, you're not going to get the acceleration and agility you're looking for. And then plan to establish the governance at your organization according to the best practices. And we have a slew of best practices out on our customer success center to help you. And with that, you can always reach out to best.practices at servicenow.com. And of course, the servicenow.com/success should get you to our success center. Haas, I'll check with you one last time for questions before we close it out.
No further questions.
Excellent. I want to thank everybody for attending, and please, based upon who attended, we should be able to email you out this. If you have any questions, you're always welcome to get in touch with me. Thank you for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.